The crown Kang Jae-Hyun surrendered is demanding blood. And this time, the target isn't his empire. It's the brilliant woman who designed it. Welcome back to the Underworld. Before we dive into this explosive final season, sound off in the comments. Where in the world are you watching from today? And I have to know. After watching Ayanna completely break Jae-Hyun's pride and force his ultimate redemption in Season 1, do you think a global cartel even stands a chance against her intellect? Drop your predictions below because the architect is about to go to war. The crystal chandeliers of the Seoul International Economic Summit didn't just rattle. They shattered. 1 second Ayanna stood at the podium in flawless ivory, commanding a room of global prime ministers and elite CEOs as the untouchable architect of Kang Holdings. The next, the grand ballroom plunged into pitch black. When the massive LED screens behind her violently flared back to life, they weren't showing corporate ledgers. They were broadcasting live satellite feeds of Kang Holdings' 3 largest shipping freighters erupting into synchronized, catastrophic fireballs in the middle of the Pacific. A distorted, heavily accented voice bled through the summit's audio system, drowning out the panicked screams of the world's elite. The king may wear a suit, but his throne is still made of ash. Give us the architect by midnight, Kang, or we sink the rest of your world. In the shadows of the VIP wing, the reformed billionaire vanished. Kang Jae-Hyun drew a suppressed sidearm from his bespoke tuxedo, his pitch-black eyes locking onto Ayanna through the crimson glare as the ballroom's automated blast doors slammed shut. The monster wasn't dead. He had just been resting. The screams of the global elite were deafening, but to Kang Jae-Hyun, the ballroom was dead silent. His tunnel vision locked entirely onto the woman in the ivory gown. Prime ministers and tech billionaires trampled each other to reach the locked mahogany doors, their legitimate power entirely vaporized by the crimson glow of the hacked screens. Jae-Hyun didn't run with the herd. He moved against it. He vaulted the velvet ropes, his bespoke tuxedo jacket pulling taut as he raised the suppressed sidearm. He hit the podium just as a stray champagne flute shattered against the teleprompter. His large hand clamped onto Ayanna's waist, violently dragging her down into the protective shadow of the heavy wooden rostrum. My ships, Ayanna gasped, her mind racing to calculate the catastrophic financial hemorrhaging happening in real time. Jae-Hyun, the Pacific Fleet was carrying half our net worth. I don't care about the ships, he snarled, his voice a jagged, terrifying rasp that hadn't surfaced in 6 months. His dark eyes scoured the panicked crowd over the barrel of his gun. The Tsar doesn't want money. He wants my soul. He wants you. The chilling reality crashed over them. The corporate empire she had meticulously built, the billions in legal assets, the senators on speed dial, it was all paper armor. A militarized global cartel didn't respect subpoenas. They respected blood. And Jae-Hyun was entirely ready to drown the city in it again to keep her breathing. Service elevator, Ayanna commanded, her shock instantly hardening into tactical ice. It dropped straight to the subterranean VIP garage. The armored Maybach is waiting. He didn't argue. He hauled her up, tucking her flesh against his chest, becoming a human bulletproof vest. They moved as a seamless, deadly unit, weaving through the stampeding dignitaries and slipping behind the heavy velvet curtains of the backstage wing. Jae-Hyun kicked the heavy steel door of the service stairwell open. The descent was a blur of flashing emergency lights and the metallic echo of their rapid footsteps. He kept his weapon raised, his jaw locked in absolute, demonic concentration. They hit the sub-level 3 landing. Jae-Hyun punched the override code into the reinforced garage door. It hissed open. The scent of cordite and fresh copper hit them before the visuals did. Jae-Hyun froze, his arm violently shoving Ayanna back behind the concrete threshold. The pristine, fluorescent-lit VIP garage was a slaughterhouse. All 8 members of his elite, highly trained corporate security detail lay scattered across the polished concrete. Shot at close range. Executed by someone they had trusted to let them get that close. But the killers standing over the bodies didn't wear cartel masks. A dozen heavy tactical rifles raised in unison. Dozens of red laser sights painted Jae-Hyun's chest and Ayanna's ivory gown. Standing at the center of the kill box was a woman in a sharp tactical trench coat, holding up a gold-stamped federal warrant. Kang Jae-Hyun, the Interpol director announced, her voice echoing over the hum of the idling armored vehicles. You are under arrest for the synchronized terrorist bombings of your own Pacific Fleet. Drop the weapon, or we will execute you where you stand. The red laser sights painted Jae-Hyun's chest like a target, but his dark eyes didn't register the federal badges. Real law enforcement didn't execute surrendered corporate security guards with close-range headshots. The Tsar hadn't just hijacked the summit, he had bought Interpol. Jae-Hyun didn't negotiate. He aimed slightly above the director's head and fired. The suppressed bullet shattered the main electrical junction box on the concrete pillar. The entire subterranean level instantly plunged into pitch-black darkness. "Move!" he roared, shoving Ayanna toward the sleek silhouette of their armored Maybach. Gunfire erupted, sparking violently against the concrete, as the corrupted agents fired blindly. Ayanna didn't hesitate. She slid into the driver's seat, the silk of her ivory gown catching on the heavy ballistic door, while Jae-Hyun threw himself into the passenger side. "Drive!" he commanded, smashing the reinforced glass of his window with the butt of his pistol to create a firing port. The Maybach's twin-turbo V12 engine roared to life. Ayanna slammed the accelerator. The massive vehicle violently peeled out of the parking bay, crushing a tactical barrier as they dove into the claustrophobic labyrinth of Seoul's subterranean service tunnels. Behind them, the roar of heavy pursuit vehicles echoed off the concrete walls. Jae-Hyun leaned into the shattered window, returning calculated, lethal fire at the blinding headlights in their rearview mirror. But as he ejected a spent magazine, a cold, suffocating terror gripped his chest. 6 months ago, he commanded an army. Today, his billions were frozen, his legitimate empire was framed for terrorism, and his corporate shields had failed completely. The absolute king of Seoul had been stripped to nothing in exactly 10 minutes. He was powerless, and the woman he had sworn to protect was in the crosshairs of a global war. "They have heavy mounted rifles," Ayanna yelled over the deafening mechanical roar, violently jerking the steering wheel to bank a sharp concrete corner. Sparks showered the windshield as the armored flank scraped the tunnel wall. "Keep the RPMs high, do not brake." Jae-Hyun fired 3 precise shots, blowing out the tire of the lead pursuit SUV. It flipped violently, but 2 more armored trucks instantly swerved past the wreckage. Then the tunnel narrowed. A heavily modified tactical truck flanked them, violently T-boning the Maybach. The impact was catastrophic. Metal shrieked as the luxury tank was thrown into a concrete pillar. Airbags deployed in a suffocating burst of white powder. The Maybach spun out, completely disabled, its engine hissing and dying in the dark. Jae-Hyun violently kicked his jam door open, pulling Ayanna from the smoking wreckage just as the pursuit vehicles screeched to a halt 50 yards behind them. "We are off the grid," Jae-Hyun rasped, blood trickling down his sharp jawline. "My safe houses are compromised. My assets are frozen. Where do we go?" Ayanna looked back at the approaching headlights, her dark eyes hardening into pure, unyielding survival. The untouchable corporate architect vanished, and the resilient teacher from the inner city returned. "Where billions of dollars and global cartels don't bother to look," she breathed, gripping his hand with ironclad determination. "My old neighborhood. We disappear in the concrete jungle." The sirens bleeding through the cracked windows of the abandoned tenement didn't belong to the police. They belonged to the cartel. Heavy boots pounded the pavement as a hit squad, disguised in city riot gear, began a brutal door-to-door sweep of Ayanna's old neighborhood. In the suffocating darkness, the power dynamic of Seoul's underworld completely inverted. Kang Jae-Hyun, the untouchable billionaire, stood in a ruined tuxedo stripped of his army. He was a king without a castle, entirely dependent on the woman who survived these streets long before she ever saved his life. "They're using thermal sweeps," Ayanna whispered, stripping copper wire from a rusted fuse box with terrifying efficiency. "I'm shorting the transformer. It'll blind their optics." Jae-Hyun watched her, his dark eyes burning with heavy kneeling reverence. She was commanding the concrete jungle with lethal intellect. "I will draw them into the alley," Jae-Hyun murmured, chambering his last round. "Trigger the surge." The apex predator slipped into the rain-slicked alley, firing a calculated shot to draw their attention, painting a massive target on his own back. As the squad surged toward him, Ayanna slammed the rigged copper wire home. The block's power grid violently detonated, plunging the hit squad into blinding darkness. In the chaotic crossfire, Jae-Hyun dragged the squad's lieutenant into the shadows of a flooded basement. Jae-Hyun raised his gun to the man's temple, but Ayanna caught his wrist. Stepping forward, she bypassed violence, dismantling the mercenary's mind by reciting the exact routing numbers of his cartel payouts she had already frozen. The lieutenant broke, coughing blood onto the concrete. "You can't hide, Kang," he wheezed, a manic grin splitting his face. "The Tsar knows how you think. He taught you how to kill. He built you." Jae-Hyun's blood ran ice cold. The Tsar wasn't just a rival. He was the monster who created him. The tenement pipes groaned under the heavy rain. Jae-Hyun stood in the dim kitchen, staring at the crushed sedative dissolving in a glass of water. His hands trembled. The revelation that the Tsar, his sadistic creator, was hunting them had shattered his psychological armor. Jae-Hyun believed his existence was a rot that would eventually consume Ayanna. He had to die in the dark so she could live in the light. He turned, finding her in the doorway, radiating fierce resilience. "Drink," he murmured, his voice a hollow rasp. "You need to rest." Ayanna looked at the water, then into his devastated eyes. She slapped the glass from his hand. It shattered violently against the linoleum. "You think you can drug me and walk into a suicide mission?" she demanded, her intellect slicing through his grief. "You think dying makes you a savior?" Jae-Hyun flinched, the underworld king breaking into raw vulnerability. "He built me, Ayanna. I am his monster. I will drag you into his hell." "You are not his monster," she fired back, gripping his lapels with unyielding force. "You burned your crown to keep me safe. Stop trying to die for me, and fight to live with me." Before he could surrender to her devotion, a synthetic screech pierced the room. Both burner phones lit up simultaneously. An encrypted broadcast forced its way onto the screens. "Such a beautiful romance," the Tsar's serpent-like voice purred. The screen flickered to a live video feed of a heavily guarded warehouse. Huddled on the cold concrete, surrounded by cartel mercenaries with raised rifles, were 20 terrified teenagers wearing the uniforms of Ayanna's former high school. The image of the terrified students didn't break Ayanna. It forged her into absolute zero. She didn't weep. She grabbed her coat and walked out into the rain, Jae-Hyun a lethal shadow at her side. 10 minutes later, his boot shattered the reinforced door of a neighborhood underground crypto mining farm. The humid room hummed with rows of high-powered servers. Jae-Hyun took the perimeter, his assault rifle raised to the street, while Ayanna dropped into the central terminal. Her fingers blurred across the keyboard. She wasn't playing defense anymore. The brilliant strategist who had dismantled a syndicate from a boardroom was now launching a full-scale global cyber war. She bypassed the cartel's firewalls with terrifying speed, bleeding directly into their offshore ledgers. Lines of code reflected in her dark eyes. "He wants to use my students as leverage," she murmured, her voice laced with pure, unadulterated venom. "I'm going to use his empire." With a final devastating keystroke, she executed a cascading virus. In seconds, $3 billion of the Tsar's laundered Swiss assets were permanently frozen. But she didn't stop there. Ayanna deliberately exposed her own proxy, broadcasting her exact location across the cartel's encrypted network. Jae-Hyun watched her from the doorway, his chest heaving with dark, reverent awe. She was painting a massive, glowing target on her own spine just to draw the cartel's crosshairs away from her classroom. The teacher had become the deadliest woman in the underworld. The terminal screen violently glitched, the green code wiping away to reveal a single, blinking text box from the Tsar himself. "A brilliant gambit, little bird. But I still hold the cage." The text dissolved into a ticking blood-red timer. 1 hour. Surrender at the Incheon industrial shipyard, or the children burn. Rain lashed against the windshield of the stolen muscle car, as Jae-Hyun pushed the engine to a terrifying 140 miles an hour. The neon blur of the highway reflected in Ayanna's dark eyes. She wasn't looking at the road. She was staring at the glowing screen of her hacked terminal, her fingers flying across the keys in a desperate, lethal rhythm. 40 minutes, Jae-Hyun rasped, his knuckles white on the steering wheel as they hurtled straight into the lion's den. He was a king driving to his execution, entirely at peace as long as she was beside him. "I don't need 40, Ayanna replied, her intellect sharpening into an absolute weapon. "The Tsar's mercenaries don't fight for loyalty. They fight for direct deposits. I just found the routing hub for their offshore payroll." She wasn't planning a shootout. She was planning a corporate massacre from the passenger seat. As the sprawling, rust-choked towers of the Incheon industrial shipyard loomed in the darkness, Ayanna executed her final command. She didn't just freeze the cartel's accounts. She drained them, triggering massive, simultaneous overdraft alerts on the encrypted network. Jae-Hyun slammed the brakes, the car skidding to a violent halt inches from the heavily fortified steel gates. Dozens of elite cartel guards raised their assault rifles, laser sights painting the windshield. But before a single shot was fired, a synchronized chorus of cell phones chimed through the freezing rain. The mercenaries looked down at their screens. Zeroed balances. Bounced wire transfers. With chilling indifference, the cartel's frontline lowered their weapons. One by one, they unbuckled their tactical vests, dropped their rifles onto the wet asphalt, and walked away into the night. The heavy steel gates groaned open, entirely unguarded. Deep inside the empty warehouse, the Tsar stood utterly alone, holding a dead man's detonator above the weeping children. The heavy steel doors closed behind them with a definitive clang. The cavernous warehouse was a graveyard of abandoned artillery, illuminated only by harsh industrial floodlights. At the center, 20 trembling students huddled together. Standing over them was the Tsar, an impeccably dressed phantom holding a detonator. The old man's cruel laughter echoed off the corrugated walls. "You drained my accounts, little bird. But I still hold the explosives." He turned his pale, reptilian eyes to the apex predator at her side. "Look at what she has reduced you to, Jae-Hyun. A king stripped of his fangs. Put a bullet in her skull right now, and the global cartel is yours. The ultimate throne." Jae-Hyun didn't draw his weapon. He didn't look at the global throne or the man who had forged him in violence. He looked only at Ayanna. Slowly, the untouchable ruler of Seoul's underworld lowered himself to the cold concrete. He knelt at Ayanna's feet, bowing his head in front of the monster who taught him love was a fatal flaw. "You are my only empire," Jae-Hyun murmured, his dark eyes burning with absolute, permanent devotion. The Tsar's face violently contorted. Enraged by the ultimate rejection, the cartel boss drew a heavy silver revolver. He didn't get to pull the trigger. Jae-Hyun launched off the concrete with terrifying demonic velocity. The brutal hand-to-hand collision shattered a nearby crate. Jae-Hyun disarmed his mentor in seconds, pressing the barrel directly between the Tsar's eyes. The kill shot. But as Ayanna watched, Jae-Hyun lowered the gun. With a sickening decisive crack, he shattered the Tsar's gun hand, then the other, dropping him to the floor alive. "I am not your monster anymore," Jae-Hyun whispered. The Tsar's shattered hands couldn't hold a weapon, but he could still press a button. A wet, blood-choked laugh bubbled from his lips as he slammed his bloody wrist against the biometric detonator strapped to his chest. Deep beneath the concrete, a heavy synchronized mechanical hum vibrated through the floorboards. Above them, an industrial digital display flared to life in radioactive crimson. 9:59. "A dirty bomb," the Tsar wheezed, his eyes rolling back in sadistic euphoria. "If I cannot have the world, neither of you will." Outside, the deafening wail of Interpol sirens pierced the shipyard. Heavy tactical teams breached the outer perimeter, their searchlights cutting through the rusted windows. But they were too late. Jae-Hyun didn't hesitate. He rushed to the weeping teenagers, throwing his massive Kevlar-clad frame over them, becoming a human blast shield. Ayanna sprinted to the central pillar, tearing the steel casing off the bomb's control panel. A terrifying labyrinth of military-grade circuitry and decoy triggers stared back at her. She wasn't a bomb technician, but she was a strategist. Find the artery and sever it. Her hands flew across the wires, bypassing secondary triggers with ruthless precision. 0:30, 0:15. Then she froze. The primary detonator was rigged with a blind failsafe. 2 identical black wires. A 50-50 chance to save a city or vaporize it. 0:10. A heavy warm hand covered hers. Jae-Hyun knelt beside her. The apex predator looked into her eyes, his pitch-black gaze entirely stripped of fear. He was completely, beautifully at peace, as long as he died beside his queen. 0:03. Ayanna squeezed his hand, raised the heavy steel shears and clamped down. 0:01. Snap. The crimson numbers vanished. The cavernous warehouse plunged into absolute, deafening silence. The bomb was dead. 5 years later, the ashes of the underworld had grown into an empire of glass and steel. High above the thriving illuminated sprawl of Seoul, the penthouse of Kang Holdings was a sanctuary of absolute, unbreakable peace. Ayanna sat at the head of the sweeping mahogany table, reviewing the global ledgers for their newly launched philanthropic foundation. She wore a sharp, tailored midnight blue blazer, her posture radiating an effortless, terrifying authority. The resilient high school teacher was a memory. In her place sat the most powerful, untouchable architect in the corporate world. The heavy glass doors slid open, but her security detail didn't flinch. Only one man was allowed to bypass her perimeter. Kang Jae-Hyun walked into the sunlit room, his flawless bespoke charcoal suit masking the faded scars beneath. The violent king of the syndicate was gone, replaced entirely by a legitimate billionaire and a fiercely devoted husband. The cartel was a dismantled ghost story, the czar rotting in an unlisted federal prison. The slate was completely, permanently clean. He stepped behind her chair, his broad chest brushing her shoulder, the physical proximity just as intoxicating as the night they met. He didn't issue commands. He poured her a glass of aged bourbon and set it precisely next to her tablet. The global markets are closed, Jae-Hyun murmured, his dark velvet voice vibrating with deep, kneeling reverence. Your empire is secure. Ayanna smiled softly, leaning back against his chest. She turned her gaze to the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the city lights flicker to life. Jae-Hyun rested his large, warm hand over hers, his thumb tracing her wedding band. A symbol forged in fire, defining a breathtaking journey of love and redemption. There were no enemies left to fight. The dominance had completely surrendered to devotion, the city was safe, and the architect ruled it all. And just like that, the ashes settle, and the architect takes her throne. From a brutal power imbalance in a burning alley to absolute, kneeling devotion, Jae-Hyun and Ayanna's journey is finally complete. Before you go, I need to know your thoughts. Drop a comment below. What was your absolute favorite moment of Ayanna's rise to power? Was it her dismantling the cartel's bank accounts from the passenger seat, or Jae-Hyun breaking his pride and dropping to his knees for her? Let's debate it in the comments right now. If you crave more intense, cinematic dark romance stories where the female lead bows to no one, and the dangerous boss risks it all for her, you are in the right place. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a chapter. If you love this dominance to devotion arc, leave a like on this video to let me know you want more stories exactly like this.